Well, we've talked a lot over the last several weeks about the new earth, heaven, those kinds of things. And we're going to wrap up next week looking at some very specific questions about heaven. We're going to look at things like, what will we do in heaven? Will there be animals in heaven? What will relationships be like? Will there be marriage? All those kinds of things. And I can tell none of y'all have any detailed questions because none of y'all emailed me any questions. And which is fine. I'm going to just try to do my best next week. And I might even take questions from the floor. I've never done that. I'm not opposed to it, but it can go bad. So we'll see how that goes. Sometimes when you open things up, you get asked rando weird questions, and you're like, man, I don't even know where you got that. But what I want us to do today, though, is look at Revelation 21 and talk about the New Jerusalem. I want us to get an understanding of what's going on here, kind of the impact of eternity and exactly what's John trying to convey at the end of this apocalyptic book. Because this book, Revelation, falls under the genre, apocalyptic genre, and we don't have that genre in our modern context. It just doesn't exist. And so books like Daniel and Revelation primarily fit into that, but there are some other parts of Jeremiah and some sections of Isaiah would kind of fall into that category. But the intent of Revelation, even though it's called apocalyptic, is to serve as a beacon of hope and a lens of divine insight in the midst of turmoil. It's akin to like having a compass in a storm. That's the purpose of this book. So it should provide direction and a glimpse of hope as a destination as this kind of world swirls in uncertainty. And I know a lot of people think of Revelation as prophecy, and there is prophecy in it, and it's technically prophecy. But it's not prophecy in the same way Isaiah and Ezekiel are prophecy. It contains prophecy, but it's prophecy that's intertwined with all these weird stories and symbols and imagery and analogies and stuff, and we read it and we're like, what in the world is this that I'm reading? It's intended to be a book of encouragement, and anybody that treats it any other way is honestly not being fair to the book, to the point. It's meant to reassure us in our faith. It's meant to show us that there is a sovereign God who is guiding the course of history towards the climax, and at the end, what we discover is good wins, evil loses. That's the purpose of this book. And I know it's been extremely abused, right? Some of that abuse is tied to the fact that it uses a lot of symbolic language and wading through when to take it literal and when things are figurative and all these kinds of things. But let's be honest. People claim to see helicopters and nuclear bombs, and then when barcodes first came out, that was the mark of the beast. And now vaccines are the mark of the beast. And then the reformers called the Catholic Church Babylon, and from Revelation 17, and now it's the United Nations. And different political figures are the Antichrist, depending on the point in history. It was the Pope and Hitler and Elon Musk or whichever president you didn't vote for. And so you hear all kinds of stuff tied to the book of Revelation, and if you're confused, it's because you hear a lot of confusing stuff. I'm just going to be flat honest with you. But let me tell you one thing about Revelation. If you read through Revelation, there is only one thing. There's multiple things, but there's one particular thing you need to keep in mind with Revelation. When it was written and distributed to believers 2,000 years ago, who then read it and were encouraged by what they read, they understood what they were reading when they read that book. They knew what it meant. They weren't confused by it. So with all that said, let's look at Revelation 21 in the New Jerusalem. And hopefully when we're done with it, that will leave us encouraged rather than confused. And I say all that because some of what I'm going to say today is part of the debate about eschatology, end time stuff. There's a constant debate about this stuff, and I'm just going to say this. I'm going to say a few things, and I don't need you to agree with me. If you go, that's not my view of this book, that's fine. It's all good. It's not going to bother me at all. I think I'm right. You think you're right. We're both going to get to find out one day when we get to heaven. I happen to think I'm a little more right than you are, but I would think you probably feel the same way, so it's fine. I'm just telling you. But I am going to try to present a strong biblical case. If you want to come to me and talk about this, you better bring the Bible, because I'm bringing the Bible. And I want to try to present a strong biblical case for my view. And I say my view, but actually, I mean, it's not like I'm not like the only one that believes this. There's a lot of millions of people out there believe this. But there are a lot that don't. And so what I'm going to try to show you today is that the New Jerusalem is not a literal city, but rather it's a symbolic city that represents a real people, and look at why that matters and why it should be encouraging to us as the church. So go ahead, if you hadn't turned there, turn to Revelation 21. Brent read it this morning already. And so I'm not going to reread the whole thing. He's already read it. But we are going to work through it. So what's the New Jerusalem? Let's establish that first. The New Jerusalem is the fulfillment of the temple of God. You can't really talk about Revelation 21 without also talking about Ezekiel 40 through 48, okay? You don't have to turn there. The prophet Ezekiel, he gives us a guided tour of an angelic figure with a measuring rod, and he measures the courts and the gates and the chambers and the Holy of Holies, which also happens in Revelation 21. And then there's a shift into the glory of God entering the temple. And if the temple is the house in the Old Testament, then God's presence, his glory is moving into that temple, into the Holy of Holies. And then in chapters 45 and 46, he gets really specific about laws and ordinances. And then in 47 through 48, he wraps up this thing with the healing waters that flow into the temple, and they transform everything into the path. Even they make the Dead Sea fresh. And then in Revelation 21, 9 through 22, 5, which is what Brent read this morning, we find a description of the city that sounds a lot like what Ezekiel describes in 40 through 48 with this vision of the temple. And it sounds a lot like the description of the Holy of Holies in Ezekiel as well. So it appears that the vision that Ezekiel has of the temple in the Old Testament finds its fulfillment not in a physical building, but in the heavenly city called the New Jerusalem, coming down in the new heavens, new earth. And then some folks will argue that it's a real temple that's built during tough times ahead after the 1,000-year reign of Christ and his return. However, if you compare Ezekiel 40 through 48 and Revelation 21, it seems more fitting that Ezekiel's vision is actually illustrating that the New Jerusalem revealed at Christ's coming is not physical, because Revelation 21 says there was no temple, because the temple was the Lord, okay? And so if what Ezekiel's describing in 40 through 48 is what's happening in Revelation 21, then there is no physical building involved in that. I mean, you can see in verse 11 of 21, where it talks, and verse 22, the city is arrayed with glory. And then in 22, I did not see a temple in it, because the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are its temple. Then if you keep reading, you'll get more description of the Lamb and the Almighty, those kinds of things. But the vision that Ezekiel fulfilled in the new heaven and new earth, in particular in the New Jerusalem that comes down out of heaven, is what's revealed in Revelation 21. Now, let's talk a little bit about the harlot and the bride. Turn over to Revelation 17 real quick, and let's read through that just a little bit so y'all have a little context of what we're talking about. There's a obvious contrast between Revelation 17 and Revelation 21. In the vision of the harlot or the great prostitute or the notorious prostitute, depending on your translation, in 17 is contrasted against the bride in Revelation 21. Let's read in verse 1 of 17. Then one of the angels who had the 7 bowls came and spoke with me. Come, I will show you the judgment of the great prostitute who is seated on many waters, The kings of the earth committed sexual immorality with her, and those who live on the earth became drunk on the wine of her sexual immorality. And then he carried me away in the spirit to the wilderness. I saw a woman sitting on a scarlet beast that was covered with blasphemous names and had 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman who dressed in purple and scarlet, adorned with gold, jewels, and pearls, she had a golden cup in her hand filled with everything detestable and with the impurities of her prostitution. And on her forehead was written a name, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes, and of the detestable things of the earth. And then I saw the woman was drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the witnesses to Jesus. And when I saw her, I was greatly astonished. Now, rather than make you flip back and forth between these two chapters, I actually put them on the slides because I want to show you just a few of the comparisons between 17 and 21. All right, so in 17:1, you have the 7 angels with the 7 bowls who came and spoke to me. Come, I will show you the judgment of this notorious prostitute. 21:9, then one of the 7 angels who held the 7 bowls filled with the last 7 plagues came and spoke to me. Come, I will show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb. You can see the comparisons. 17:3, then he carried me away in the spirit to the wilderness. 21:10, he carried me away in the spirit to a great high mountain and showed me the holy city Jerusalem coming down out of heaven. And then in 17:4, the woman was dressed in purple and scarlet, adorned with gold and jewels and pearls. She had a golden cup in her hand filled with all the detestable impurities of prostitution. 21:11, arrayed with God's glory, her radiance, this is the New Jerusalem, her radiance was like a precious jewel, like jasper, clear as crystal. Now, there's more comparisons we can make from this, but this is enough for me to make my point. These are obviously intentional contrasts in these passages. So what's going on here? What's John trying to tell the church? John's trying to tell us something about our relationship with God as the bride of Christ. On one side, there is the great prostitute that represents the unholy, idolatrous world that's as unfaithful as they come. That's the description. And on the other side, there's the faithful, pure bride, the church, a beautiful bride that has fallen totally in love with the bridegroom, Christ. That's the imagery we get here. And then get this. Both cities, Babylon and the New Jerusalem, are dressed in gold and precious stones and pearls. And then look at verse 9 of chapter 21. The angel comes to John and says, I will show you what? The bride, the wife of the Lamb. Then what happens in 10? He carried me away in the spirit to a great mountain and showed him what? The New Jerusalem, the city. So just like John has shown the great prostitute Babylon in 17, he's shown the bride, the New Jerusalem, in 21. And you can't have a figurative city in 17 and a literal city in 21 and make sense of those passages. So unless you think Babylon and the great prostitute is literal, to get your literal city in 21, I'm presenting to you that New Jerusalem is not a literal city. But that doesn't mean it's not real. What I mean by that is he told us that this is the bride, the wife of the Lamb. If you look back at verse 2 of 21, you'll notice that the New Jerusalem comes down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And then in 9, the bride is presented. 10, the bride's presented. And so if you connect the dots, it's pretty clear. The New Jerusalem is the people of God. It's us. We're not just residents of the city, we are the city. So imagine that. The New Jerusalem is the church made perfect, beautified by the grace of God that we received at the return of Christ, where we're glorified and all the things that are coming that we've been talking about over the last several weeks. Now, I know that might stretch your imagination a bit. I mean, if you look at today's church and kind of the, I don't know, it doesn't always look like a jeweled bride, right? But that's because we're still dealing with the results of sin and those kinds of things. But that's not going to be the case at the end. We'll talk about that later. But honestly, what this is saying is that we're going to be decked out in heavenly splendor, might be the best way to put that. Keep that in the back of your mind. So, what about all those descriptions and measurements throughout the rest of this chapter? Let's look at it. If it's a symbolic city, why all the descriptions of jewels and gates and specific measurements of the city itself? It's a symbolic city that's representing something very real, and that is the body of Christ, the people of God. And when we're talking about the city, the Lamb, we're told the New Jerusalem holds the glory of God. Verse 11, arrayed with the glory of God, holds the glory of God. And if you know anything about the Old Testament, back in the Old Testament, God's glory was anchored in the temple, in the Holy of Holies. God met with Israel in the Holy of Holies, and the glory of God appeared there once a year, right? And some of what we looked at in Hebrews over the last several weeks kind of talks about why that doesn't happen anymore. You might be familiar with the story of the veil of the temple being torn in two, and the glory of God coming out of the Holy of Holies. It's all tied to this. It's all tied together. But the description of the city, the measurements, are a perfect cube. 1,500 miles, 1,500 miles, 1,500 miles. 12,000 stadia is 1,500 miles. It's a perfect cube covered in gold and jewels. The Holy of Holies is also a perfect cube covered in gold and jewels, and what's placed there was the Ark of the Covenant and some of the other things. It was placed there where God's holiness was on full display in the Holy of Holies within this perfect cube. But in the New Jerusalem, God's glory is not confined to a building. It's flowing through his people where we become the city where God resides. And don't miss that. The glory isn't something we're waiting for in the future. The glory is something we have now. That's what Jesus prayed in John 17 when he said, the glory that you've given me, I've given to them. And this glory finds its ultimate expression at the end in the new heavens and the new earth, but particularly in the New Jerusalem, which is us. But what about the rest of the city? You ever wonder about jasper? I bought some jasper about 3 weeks ago. I bought some little jasper rocks. They weren't expensive. They were actually, I think I bought 12 for like $5 off Amazon. And, they came, they're really, really pretty red. It's red, and they have some like dark veins going through them, which is the most common form of jasper is that. And they're not like super fancy. They got like a couple of chips in them and some stuff like that. But they're, I wanted to see what jasper looked like. And, but if you cross-reference jasper in 21 with Revelation 4:3, Revelation 4:3 talks about the one seated on the throne had the appearance of jasper. Okay? So we have jasper mentioned about the Lamb seated on the throne. And the thing is there's over 40 types of jasper, and they come in multiple colors. Red is the most common, blue is the rarest. But what we have here is God described as having the appearance of jasper in chapter 4, and then the radiance of the city described as made of jasper in chapter 21, and that's not coincidence. So you have this great high wall, which represents the unbreakable bond between God and his people, this secure fellowship we share with God. So think about it. So the walls represent the fact there's no more enemies. There's nothing else that can come at us. No more threats. And that's not just physical threats. That's health threats and financial threats and whatever threats you can think of. The walls represent the fact that those don't exist anymore in heaven. And it's like this ancient symbol of ultimate safety. It's a fortified wall where there'll be no surprises, nothing unwelcome. They don't even close the gates because there's no reason to. These walls represent God's protection and security and ultimately an unbreakable fellowship that we have with the Father for all eternity. Now in verse 12, you see the gates and the angels stationed at each one. So you have these celestial guards they should point us back to the angels connected to the 7 churches in chapters 2 and 3. And just to be clear, the names of the 12 tribes are 12 tribes of Israel are etched onto these gates. But the symbolism doesn't stop there. The wall foundation, there's 12 foundation stones inscribed with the names of the 12 apostles. So there's a divine echo of the number 24 from going back into Revelation 4. And here's a word problem for you. Those of y'all that like math, this was an easy one. What comes together to make the number 24 in this chapter? It's the 12 tribes of Israel and the 12 apostles, which represent what? The Old Covenant and the New Covenant coming together. And here in Revelation 21, those two things come together to form the foundation of the city, which is the bride of Christ, the church, which points us back to the fact that the church has been a part of the people of God, had been a part of the church, even when they didn't even know the church existed, going all the way back to Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. G.K. Beale, who wrote the book I've got, I prefer Kindle these days, but my G.K. Beale book's about that thick. I'm not kidding. It's like 1,500 pages or something. This is what he says about this section. He said, the integration of the apostles together with the tribes of Israel as part of the city's temple structure prophesied in Ezekiel 40 through 48 confirms that the multiracial Christian church will be a redeemed group together with Christ who fulfills Ezekiel's prophecy of the future temple in the city. And again, we see one people of God comprised of believing Jews and believing Gentiles who both together inherit the promises of God. And that's what's being shown to us here in the New Jerusalem in Revelation 21. It's a holistic vision of unity of every tribe and people and tongue and nation, which is a verse from Revelation 5. I mean, there's a vivid reminder that the city symbolizes God's collective people together, manifesting the glory of God as one covenant people in eternal fellowship with Him. And then these measurements, there's actually more unity tied to these measurements. It says the angel measured the city with a rod. Probably took a long time too, because 1,500 miles. Think of old carpenters. I'm not getting there. Y'all know how old carpenters used to measure? I did construction work for years, and when we would work on old houses in the South, the measurements were never the same. I mean, you go to measure a door is supposed to be 6 feet 7 inches, but these might be 6'8", they might be 7 feet, they might be 31 inches when they should be 32, it didn't matter. What they would do was, they would do this and go, oh, that's 1 foot. But it depended on how long your hands were, how long your fingers were. Because what if your hands were short? That's 1 foot. They didn't have tape measures back then, so working on those old houses was terrible. But anyway, that's what I picture when I picture that angel going out there with a rod, just like moving that rod down. I don't know why. Weird thing to, right? So the measured here, though, this measure, when it says the angel measured, there is a literal measurement involved. But there's more being presented to us here than just figuring out the length of this city. It's actually the same word that's used in Matthew 7:2. It says, this is the verse, for with the judgment you pronounce, you will be judged, and with the measure you use will be measured to you. And we understand that concept. The angel is not simply determining lengths. There is a underlying symbol of what the angel is doing is measuring the value of the bride. And the description that we get of the New Jerusalem is something that is invaluable. It's covered in gold and pearls and precious stones, and it's so giant it would take up like a third of the earth if it literally came down and sat on the earth. It's 1,500 miles tall, which is 8 million feet. So it's practically immeasurable. An angel had to measure it to figure out how big it was. He's measuring its value. And so we're told this city is a cube. In verse 16, it's laid out, its length and width and height are the same. Now in verse 17, the walls that encircle this are 144 cubits. And if you're not carrying around an ancient ruler, that's 216 feet, but that doesn't really matter for this. 144 is more important than 216. Because these aren't just random numbers. Because again, we got a math problem. If you multiply the 12 tribes of Israel by the 12 apostles, what do you get? 144. So it's like math with a divine purpose. They show God's people, whether from Israel or from the church, are fundamentally united. Now, can you imagine? I know this is important today, but with all of the infighting and discussion and arguments that were going on between the Jews and the Gentiles in the early days of the Christian church, can you imagine how important this piece of information would have been to that group of people? But one of the other things to point out is it is a square, right? And you know, I'm gonna skip some stuff because I'm gonna get in a bunch of math and stuff y'all don't really care anything about. That's just preacher stuff. Let me skip this. I'm not going to skip it all because this is cool. I just want to point this out. It probably has nothing to do with the sermon, but when I ran across this, when I was looking at these numbers, which I got to be honest with you, normally I avoid Revelation. I don't say avoid it, but it's a difficult book. So I put more time in than I normally would have, and it actually got me excited. I'm not going to start preaching through Revelation anytime soon, but I am really enjoying it again after years of kind of working around it. So we've already compared the prostitute and the bride, but Revelation also compares the beast and the angel. In Revelation 13:8, we're told that the number of the beast is 666, and that's the number of man. But here in 21:17, we're told that the angel who showed John the New Jerusalem measured its wall, 144 cubits by human measurement, which is also an angel's measurement. Now, why does that matter? Well, here's one of the reasons. So when you see there's a contrast between the number of man, 666, and the number of the beast, and the 144, the measure of an angel. Now, what's interesting about these numbers is 666 is the numerical value of the Greek word beast written in Hebrew letters. And 144 is the numerical value of the Greek word angel written in Hebrew letters. Why does that matter? Well, for one, it's kind of cool when you make the connection, but that's not really helpful. What's helpful to see is all of this symbolism is tied together, pointing us to one thing that's wrapped up in chapters 21 and 22 of Revelation, that everything God has been working in redemption since the creation of the world is going to come to fruition at the end when we realize that it doesn't matter our heritage, when we realize it doesn't matter our economic or socioeconomic status. The only thing that's going to matter at the end is where our name's written in the Lamb's Book of Life. That's the last thing it tells us. Let's look a little bit at the materials a bit. Verse 18. We talked about jasper, but it also talks about the city itself as pure gold like clear glass. Now, I got to be honest with you, I have not handled a lot of gold in my life, but I've handled enough to know that you can't see through it. So how is gold like clear glass? Gold that you can see through? Is that what John's trying to tell us here? I mean, it's literally the epitome of can't see through it. I mean, it's gold. Glass is transparent. So what's going on here? Well, first of all, John's not giving us technical specs. He's trying to stretch us and capture the essence of the city's splendor and its value. And this, speaking of splendor, he talks about the foundation stones that are essentially a list of 12 jewels that are identical to the jewels that the high priest wore on their outer garment in Exodus 28 and 39. But check this out. In the Old Testament, those jewels represented the 12 tribes of Israel. But in Revelation, they're the foundation stones that symbolize the apostles. So they've been switched between the Old Covenant and the New Covenant. And in 1 Peter 2:5, Peter says that we are living stones. Believers, we are living stones in a spiritual house. All of this tied together, and the point is not that there's a lot of jewels going around. It's not about flaunting wealth or promising, gold mansions. It's literally about the beauty and the holiness and the character of God seen through the people of God. And I know we don't need any help thinking about ourselves. But I'm giving you a pass this time that this is talking about us, tied to the glory of God. And speaking of glory, the city is arrayed with the glory of God. And the glory they're bringing into the city is the collective voices of the redeemed raise and praise. We see that in Revelation 4, Revelation 11, Revelation 5, and 21. As they offer up glory, believers offer up glory to the Lamb, honor to the Lamb. There's no night because Christ is the light. There's no sun. But honestly, if you want to know the truth, there's one particular thing in this as it's tied to the end that I think should encourage us all. Even if you look and go, I have no idea, anything you're talking about this morning, you threw out too many numbers, and I don't like it, right? Pay attention to this part. In the New Jerusalem, there's no sin. Nothing detestable, nothing unclean will be able to make it through the gates. Meaning that we will no longer sin, will no longer be controlled by sin, we will no longer suffer the effects of sin, whether our own sin or other people's sin, because there will be no sin. And then at the very end of 2021, the ones who are part of this city are the ones whose names are written in the Lamb's book of life, and they will bask in the presence of God for eternity. Usually when you talk about Revelation and Lamb's book of life and the great white throne of judgment and all those things, people get a little nervous because the question comes up, man, is my name in that book? I remember as a kid hearing guys preach on Revelation, and I was thinking, man, is my name in the Lamb's book of life? What does that even mean? Is it like a real book? As a kid, I remember asking my dad, Dad, is there a real book in heaven with my name in it called the Lamb's Book of Life? My dad was like, absolutely, it's a real book in there. And it may be a real book. I don't have any idea. It's fine if it is, but I can remember asking myself that question. And I think that's not a terrible question to ask, but this is not the full extent of the questions we should be asking. I think what we should be asking is, do we have a thirst for Jesus? Do we treasure Jesus? Do we seek Jesus? Do we trust Jesus? Is our life rooted in his life, in his death, and his burial and resurrection? If the answer to that is yes, then your name's in the Lamb's Book of Life. And if the answer to that is no, do you want your name in the Lamb's Book of Life? Because we're told how to make that happen. Root your life in the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And embrace what he's accomplished at the cross. There's nothing holding anybody back from that, other than usually just, a lot of times just pride. But have you ever thought about how the New Jerusalem, this concept of the New Jerusalem and what we read in these chapters affects us now? I always try to ask myself that question. How does it affect me now? Because I don't know when the end is. None of us do. It could be within my lifetime, it could be 10 seconds from now, or it could be 10,000 years from now. None of us know. So we've got this already not yet concept going on, but what about now? See, I don't see this as just a celestial dream in the future. I see it as something that we're experiencing in the moment because the Holy Spirit already dwells in us, has taken up residency in our hearts, and there is a true sense in which we already have this fellowship with God, that we're already part of the bride of Christ, that we're already the church gathered. Look around, gathered. Like we're going to gather in heaven. It's going to be way, way better. And I love y'all, but it's just going to be better. I'm just telling you. And I think one of the things, when Paul talks in 1 Corinthians 3:16, he says, "Do you not know that you are God's temple and that the Spirit of God dwells in you?" Now, can you see how that ties all the way to the end in Revelation 21? And so I think God's basically saying, look, it's coming. The end is coming, and it's going to be perfect, and it's going to be awesome. But in the now, don't wait on a heavenly zip code to seek my presence. I'm already here. And that's not just comforting. It's actually transformative because it affects how we live in the now as we look to the future. And look, I get it. I don't even want to sidestep it. Despair and pain and questions and heartache are all part of the journey in the now. And the New Jerusalem will stand as a lighthouse in the fog of the chaos that we live in this broken world. It stands as a beacon of unshakable hope. And the struggles that we feel, 2 Corinthians 4 tells us the struggles we feel now pale in comparison to the glory that we're going to see at the end when Christ returns. So we go about our lives with an eternal focus, knowing that ultimately the goal isn't confined just to what's going to happen here, but is anchored in God's eternal kingdom. And I think one of the biggest, I know a lot of times when we think about the devil prowling around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour, and what he's doing on earth right now, is we think what the devil's trying to do is make the earth as bad as possible. But I don't think that's what he's trying to do. I think his goal is to convince people that they can make this, not this building, but open the building up and just go, look around. That they can make the world heaven on earth, that they have the ability to do that. And some of the crazy stuff we hear people doing, some of the, and I don't want to get on a tangent about political stuff and cultural stuff at this moment. I don't mind getting on a tangent, I just don't want to do it right now, but some of the insane things that are coming out about which basically the religion of tied to climate stuff, and how they are trying their best to actually destroy the poor in an effort to create, clean energy or whatever. And I'm pro-clean energy. I don't think we're headed that right direction to get there, but I'm not against it. But the craziness you see in that, we're like, yeah, we're going to force this, and we're going to force this, and force this, and we're going to get rid of meat and make you eat bugs and all that stuff that you see. Right? Which when you hear that, don't you go, where do they even get, how is that an idea? Because they think they can make heaven on earth. They think they can create utopia on earth. Revelation 21 says it ain't happening on earth. It's happening at the end. But in the now, those of us that are believers are already experiencing on just some basic level that we can enjoy as much as we can now when we look forward to the future. And the best thing about it is because, like, look around. These are your people gathered in this room. We are in this together. We can help each other draw closer to God together. We can remind each other when we're down and out, hey, look, there's a day coming. There's a new Jerusalem going to come down, and all this chaos, all this craziness, all this heartache's going away. But in the meantime, I'm here. I got your back. Because we're both indwelled with the glory of God and the Spirit of God. Amen? So worship team, y'all go ahead and come on up. The New Jerusalem doesn't float into existence on its own. It's actually the grand finale of Christ's redemption. We talked about redemption and resurrection tied to Christ and creation. This New Jerusalem concept is the grand finale that comes down. Christ is a cornerstone that makes the whole thing fit together spiritually. He's a spiritual cornerstone. That's Ephesians 2. He's the one who gave up his life to set the blueprint for this city. He's the one that declared it's finished on the cross. He wasn't just talking about this moment. He was laying the foundation of the dwelling place for the eternal. And you see, you cannot separate the hope of the New Jerusalem from Christ. He's the one that's going to wipe away every tear. He's the one where death will be no more grief, no more crying, no more pain, all tied to Christ. He's the one who endured the cross to bring us this incredible destiny tied to the New Jerusalem. He's not a far-off Savior. He is an imminent Savior, which means He's close, He's involved, He's working in your life. He said, I'm going to prepare a place for you, and where I'm going to bring you with me. Right? So He's even working on that right now. What everything that means, I don't know, but I know it's definitely tied to this New Jerusalem concept. So as you go about your day, your week, your life, we are citizens of heaven, but we're ambassadors here for Christ. You cannot separate Christ from the end. It's His redemption that allows that to happen. It's the cross that allows that to happen. It was the resurrection that allows that to happen. And so as we partake in communion today, as we look at the concept of His atoning work, His shed blood, and His broken body, and then told us, when you gather, do this and remember what I did for you. Do it in remembrance of me. And that's what we're going to do this morning. And if you're with us this morning and you're a baptized believer, we encourage you to partake in this with us. The worship team's going to sing a song. While they're singing, just celebrate what Christ has done for you. Celebrate in this moment in prayer and meditation what it will look like for you to be in the presence of God in heaven at the end with the people of God because of the cross. And then come